Hello, dreamers, and welcome back to the show again. This is the 329th episode of Killafornia Dreaming, and it is also the third part of a multi part series where we have been discussing the 2013 shooting death of a 42-year-old husband, father of three, stepfather of one. His name was Jason Rogers, shot by his wife, Rebecca. So if you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2, you're going to want to go ahead and listen to those first. They're episodes 327 and 328. And once you're done with those, come back to this one. Before we get started, I have a few quick notes about the show. This is still an ad-free production, which means I depend on the listeners to help keep us going. And the ways you can help include joining the Facebook discussion group, follow the show on Facebook and on Instagram and X. And if some of you are new to the show and you haven't heard, I do also own a small oil change business in the city of Las Vegas. If you could give that page a follow as well, it will help tremendously, especially if you're local or if you travel here in your car. We could use the follows there as well. It's called Costa Oil Las Vegas. That's COSTA. It is woman-owned. It's a small business. It's a little bit of a franchise, but it's still mine. I'd appreciate all the support there as well. Message me if you want me to send you the link to the page. And if you want some stickers from there or from the show, it's coming up to time where I'm going to need to start sending out some mailers to those of you who have joined Patreon. I want to send all of you who've ever been a patron, but if you would like some stickers from the oil shop too, I would love it. Those shops, the franchise is based in, I want to say, Eastern Pennsylvania. The headquarters is in Hanover. Most of the shops are in the Midwest and east of there. There's this one. I have to look and see if there's any more between here and like the Mississippi River. But there's also one in Phoenix, I believe. So this is the only one in Nevada. If you're coming here and you want to go to Costa Oil, there's only one. So, and it's mine. You will have to see me. Luckily, I won't be changing your oil because then you'd be in trouble. Anyway, that's enough self-promotion for right now. I am going to get an episode on Patreon, so I appreciate you guys hanging in there. I'm going to make up for all of this. I've just been lagging, and I'm sorry. I'll get to it, I swear. And that is basically all the junk that I have to say in the beginning of these episodes. Let's get back to our case because I'm really excited to talk about this. We are discussing the interrogation of Rebecca Rogers. It's happened back in 2013. She shot and killed her husband, Jason, and then would make the claim of self-defense, along with the history of domestic violence, none of which I believe has any validity. Some of you may disagree. I don't know. She sounds so bullshitty to me. I can't imagine that any of you actually disagree. If you do, we could talk about it in the Facebook group. We can talk about it on Instagram. I've been getting into some heated discussions, not about crime, but about my oil shop, unfortunately. I'd rather be on there having heated discussions about crime. I don't want to haggle the prices that I'm charging for the oils that I'm selling because you know what? Oil prices are going up right now, so my prices might have to start going up too. I don't want to have to do that. I'm trying to do the same thing that I'm doing with Patreon and Costco does with their hot dog combo. I want it to stay the same, but I might not have a choice. It all depends on how this nonsense in Iran plays out, but that's not even anything I'm willing to discuss here on the show beyond that it is having an impact. But anyway, let's get on with this. This is the third of 4, possibly 5 parts of reading between the bullshit, the ridiculous interrogation of Rebecca Rogers. Alrighty, so in the last part, we left off with Rebecca casually walking us through the minor details of the moment that she shot her husband, Jason. After, of course, claiming that he was choking her, all stemming from a completely reasonable and totally proportional argument over a pack of cigarettes. According to her, they had been arguing all afternoon because nothing says a relaxing day like a slow burning fight that just keeps on giving. Apparently, things really kicked off at dinner when she embarrassed him in front of some people he did work for at the body shop that he's employed at. You know, the kind of social faux pas that clearly justifies everything that followed, right? From there, the argument escalates because, of course, it does, to the point where Rebecca says Jason pulled over and demanded that she drive. She refused, naturally, because why de escalate when you can, right? Yeah, not. So they get back into the car, they head home, and at some point, Rebecca claims that Jason leaves for a while. Totally normal evening thus far, okay? But wait, it gets better. When Jason comes back, she says he either smells like cigarettes or is actively smoking one. And this apparently is where things just cross the line. This is the unforgivable offense, the point of no return, truly deserving of, well, the ultimate consequence of death, apparently. So what does Rebecca do? Oh, just heads out to the truck, helps herself to his cigarettes because why not, and then strolls back in with what I'm sure was the calmest, most peaceful energy imaginable. Rebecca claims that all she said was, "Oh, I guess you went to the store and got some cigarettes." Totally harmless, innocent, practically angelic. And then, oh, a minor detail, Rebecca proceeds to smash the packaging and throw them in the trash. And oh yes, that was definitely the moment that, quote, set him off, according to her. That's when he supposedly flew into this irrational rage. Because obviously, that's the tipping point here in this whole thing, was her doing that to his cigarettes that he went to the store and bought. From there, over these cigarettes, Rebecca claimed that Jason then physically attacked her. He grabbed her by the neck, she says, brought her to the ground, had her down there with his hands, squeezing to the point that she couldn't breathe. And she was like, "Stop." And in a moment of clarity and acceptance of her fate that she was just going to die, she allowed her body to relax when suddenly Jason told her that he was going to go to jail that night and that he was going to end this. So Jason got up and headed towards the closet that they shared in the master bedroom, where he apparently stored his gun. He bent down. He was searching through the closet. But not only does Jason apparently keep his gun on a low shelf or a portion of the closet in the house full of his young daughters, he has to spend several moments searching for his weapon because he apparently doesn't seem to know where he keeps it exactly. Because when you have a weapon in your house that you keep for your protection, you only need to minimally or vaguely or kind of semi know where it's at all times. Here or there, some of the time, maybe when it crosses your mind, like you might put it somewhere else or you think you're being clever and then you find out like, oh, shoot, where did I put my dangerous loaded weapon again? I know I keep it within reach of my girls, but dang, where'd it go, right? Because that's the epitome of firearm safety. But what do I know? I'm not a gun owner. And oh my, it gets better from there. Oh, it gets better every single time, dreamers. Every time. It gets better and better and better, this woman. She admitted to these detectives that she, too, keeping her gun in her office that is doubling as a guest room for her oldest daughter, home visiting from the military or just about to go off to the military after graduating from whatever she graduated from. Because clearly this family is all about gun safety. Gun safety apparently being keeping them all willy-nilly all over the house, all loaded within reach of all the kids and all their friends, who were drinking, by the way, right? So she goes to where her gun is conveniently stashed. I mean, where she secretly planted it for her convenience. I mean, where she claims she keeps her gun because she's always in her office when weirdos come to the front door all hours of the day, right? That, again, as the utmost responsible gun owner, has the gun she bought 6 months earlier. No, her bad. She lied. A year earlier. Duh. She says because she was afraid of front door weirdos, car accident scene investigations, and her own husband's apparent erratic behavior. All that darn cigarette smoking that bastard does, right? Legitimate reasons to arm yourself, I say. But yet, never took it to the range, never took a class on learning how to use it, telling these detectives repeatedly that she needed to protect herself from the weirdos, the car accident victims, and smoking husbands. Yet, never bothered to learn the basics of gun safety and gun handling. I mean, with all the precautions this couple apparently took/did not take, I mean, someone in this house was bound to take a bullet or two eventually, I suppose. It just so happened to be Jason. She had to protect herself from that cigarette smoking monster. 2 bullets in the back and 1 to the head is the consequence of that in their happy little home, I suppose. And so that's where we left off. So we'll pick up our story from there. And the one thing that I will give Rebecca credit for is that she is consistent in that she's quite unapologetic about her shooting of her husband. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or how that would or would not work against her. In the world of crime, when we have these type of incidents where someone is shot in self-defense, we find it to be quite a high standard in order for authorities to accept that for the shooting to be ruled justifiable. It doesn't happen too often where the person who did the shooting is actually found to be justified in what they did because they end up on shows that we watch and the podcasts that we listen to. They come up with these outlandish stories to try and frame the confrontation in the most favorable way to bolster their claims of self-defense. And most of the time, it's nearly impossible to make the story fit the evidence. It's apparent to most of us when we listen to their side of the story, when we usually don't buy it. We pick up on that pretty quickly. And, speaking of, most recently, well, somewhat recently, on a sidetrack, I like to say side note, but let's be real. Is it ever really just a note? We could even call it a side quest. We had this doctor in Hawaii, Maui, if you want to parse islands. Gerhardt. Gerhardt Koenig. What a name, right? Gerhardt. I have nothing against it. I don't think anyone listening to this podcast is named Gerhardt. But let me just say, wow, if ever there was a name suited for such a punchable face, nothing against the name. It's against his face, his look, his vibe. Just, you want to punch him and everything. What a name. Wow. Gerhardt. He's the one who tried to murder his wife on a alleged birthday celebration day trip that he planned to Oahu with his wife, Ariel. It was a total setup. Clearly a setup, just like I believe Rebecca set Jason up in this case that we've been discussing. He had been so angry with his wife, Gerhardt, having this quote-unquote emotional affair with a coworker of hers, that he decided killing Ariel was the only way to deal with it. He tried pushing her down a cliff or something like that on a hike, and then he bashed her in the head with a rock. And as smart as this dumbass thought he was, being a doctor and all, he turned out to be the stupidest smart person ever, thinking that he would be able to get rid of his wife in such spectacular fashion, right there on the beautiful island of Oahu, on a hiking trail, in broad daylight, on a beautiful spring day, and everyone would just be happily passing by on their own hikes, like you're going along minding your own business and suddenly you hear a woman screaming, literally bloody murder, help me, he's trying to kill me. And a year later, he claims that she tried to kill him. Brilliant, doctor, just brilliant. So the audaciously audacious Gerhardt had the audacity to sit up there on the stand and to tell the good folks of Hawaii that he was the victim. And they tried to make, they being Gerhardt's prosecution team, they tried to make her out to be some sort of manipulative, adulterous Jezebel, while in the same breath claiming that he wasn't the one who was disgruntled over her emotional affair. Of course, it fell flat and Gerhardt was convicted. It certainly didn't help that he called his son right after he tried to kill Ariel and confessed right away. And it was quite impressive, actually, to see Gerhardt's son on the stand, the victim's stepson, to not only testify for the prosecution against his dad, but to continue to be supportive of his stepmom and continuing to live with her in the same home that they used to share with his dad, whom he only referred to as the defendant in court, which to me is a step up from Gerhardt. It was actually quite extraordinary to watch. But anyway, my side quest point is this. To me, Rebecca's fanciful tale of self-defense is landing just about as effectively as Gerhardt, someone please punch me in the face, Koenig's. Rebecca here will not be diverging from her story whatsoever, as did Gerhardt. He stuck to it and he was committed. I'll have to give him that. But hey, he's a doctor, so clearly he can very easily maintain that punchable face look under any situation or any amount of pressure, right? Yeah, so Rebecca, she's not moving, she's not budging, she's sticking to her story. It's full of lies, it's full of inconsistencies, but the one thing Rebecca's on point about is that she feared for her life. She did what she did, and no matter what anybody has to say, no matter what anybody thinks, she was 1000% right, 1000% justified, period. End of story. But I have heard a few cases where the self-defense was real. The story was legitimate, and the demeanor of the person who did the shooting or the killing in order to save their own life, it's distinctive and it's uniquely different from every single fake self-defense case out there. In the few times that I've heard real 911 calls made by individuals who shot someone in self-defense, there's an air to it, a tone that's just abundantly emotional over what they just had to do. Nobody who owns a gun ever wants to kill anybody, right? I mean, like the average gun owner doesn't want to kill somebody. They want the gun for peace of mind. And if, heaven forbid, they ever have to confront an attacker or an intruder, in the cases that I've watched and listened to, almost always, they give loud verbal warnings and commands. I've got a gun. Don't come any closer. Don't come inside this house. Don't open that door. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on their way. I'll shoot you. I swear I'll shoot you. And they give them multiple warnings. And they'll show them the gun. If the intruder is still encroaching, they'll continue to, and the very last thing that they want to do is to fire at that person. Some people may even fire a warning shot. Maybe not so much inside their house, but outside, yeah. That whole get off my property, pew, 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 is usually enough of a deterrent, right? Well, of the many things that you don't get to do with your gun is shoot somebody in the back and claim self-defense. Perhaps in rare circumstances and with a proper and thorough investigation, that might be deemed justified. However, most of the time, the threat has to be imminent. If Jason had a gun in his hand and Rebecca needed to shoot him in the back before he spun around and shot her, then I could accept that. But he didn't have the gun. I don't know if the gun was even in the place that he was looking for it. In addition to that, what they did find on the ground next to Jason in the closet indicated to me anyway that there was something more going on in this scene. I don't know if I mentioned it yet in the first two parts. I can't remember off the top of my brain. I may have, but if I haven't, it will be coming up soon. But what they did find was money all over the floor of the closet, like several thousands of dollars, not a gun. And I have a theory about that money, which I will share with you when I get to it. In this case, and because of that money, I believe the shots in the back amounted to cold-blooded murder. And I believe that money played a role in him turning his back on her, so she could have a clean shot without any resistance from him. So getting back to Rebecca's story, we left off where she had just started shooting him. The last thing I said that she said in part 2 was that she saw blood on Jason's head. But the very next thing she did was roll back on what she was saying when she next stated, and I don't know if it was on his head, because when you see blood coming from someone's head, it might not be coming from his head. Rebecca here is just planting seeds of doubt as she goes along, reaping and sowing her bullshit. Anyway, she continued, and when I saw blood, I didn't do anything else because I knew I'd hit him. And I was like, oh my God, like I knew I'd hit him. Very astute observation on her part. So the detective asked, okay, what happened next? Quickly, Rebecca answered, he lay there. And what else? He was fighting, like moaning and moving his arms. None of this really makes sense to me. She shoots him twice in the back, and in 5 seconds, he's doing all sorts of stuff still. First, he's just laying there. Then he's fighting. Then he's moaning. Then he's moving his arms. I mean, not too bad for taking 2 in the back, right? Still got all your gross motor skills going on, control of your body, and probably control of his thoughts too, if that was the case. I'm sure that it's possible to continue to be moving and making noises and all sorts of stuff going on as somebody is dying. But I don't know because I've never shot anybody, so I don't know what that looks like. The detective asked, and was he saying anything? Rebecca replied, just moaning and, and I don't know. I mean, it was awful. It's not, and cue the attempt at sounding emotional once again. He cut her off, though. He didn't even let her. It was awful. I mean, it's not. And then he was like, when he was digging around in the closet, did he say anything to you? Rebecca replied, I couldn't hear him, but when he was choking me, he said, I'm going to jail tonight. See, she's still not attributing anything threatening that he was doing while his back was turned to her. Imagine if you were angry and your wife already fired off a shot in the other room. Remember, before she shot him 3 times, and ultimately I believe there was a 4th shot that went into the wall. But before she did all that, she shot once in the other room. Your wife already fired off another shot in the other room. Are you really just going to be all casually looking through your closet for your gun? Honestly, wouldn't you be freaking out, yelling, maybe even trying to call the police, trying to disarm your wife or to take her down, try to get the gun away from her, run out of the house, grab your children? Anything but calmly looking through the closet? I do believe that Jason was looking in the closet. I don't think that shot happened before that. I don't know when the shot in the other room happened, but I think if it had while he was looking for whatever he was looking for in the closet, that it would have taken him away from the closet. Or maybe she fired that to lure him out of the closet. You know what I mean? I don't know. Or maybe to try to get him to turn around because his back was turned and she knew that she needed to fire at him while he was advancing on her. And nobody who's ready to fight advances backwards, right? There's so many different possibilities, and we'll never really know because the only one who survived, who lived to tell, was her. She made sure of that. I believe Jason was in the closet looking at and or for something, but not a gun. I believe Rebecca got him into that position on purpose in order to shoot him in a way that was convenient for her. I'll expand on that more as her story progresses. So for now, the only thing that Rebecca is willing to attribute to Jason having said to her was that he was going to jail tonight. It is an ominous kind of thing to say that could mean that he intended to kill her and was fully prepared to go to jail. And he may very well have said something along those lines, but it could have meant any number of things. It just plays well into Rebecca's self-defense story, and she refuses to put any more conversation or context around it. If she did, it probably wouldn't sound all that threatening. If she were to actually share more about the moments surrounding that statement that she says Jason made. Rebecca continued and next stated in her interview with police, quote, and he said, this is it. I'm ending this. And that's when he took off down the hallway. The detective asked, has he been abusive to you in the past? Yes, he has. I mean, I've never reported it. Now, get this, dreamers. Listen to what she's going to say next. Quote, I never reported it. I did call the police on him probably 2 years ago, and they came and took him off because he said he was going to kill himself. Yeah, you heard that right. She said that the one and only time she ever called the police on Jason, is how she worded it, is when he threatened self-harm. To me, that does not bode well for her at all. This is yet another thing Rebecca will not put any context around, but to me, it's pretty clear that she took Jason's threat seriously enough to call the police and have him taken by ambulance for treatment. I don't know enough about the whole thing to come to a conclusion about that, but to me, it makes me feel as if Jason was vulnerable and he was dealing with some pretty fragile emotions in this marriage. And you know what else? You know what else this means? Rebecca never called the police to report an incident of domestic violence carried out against her by her husband. The detective asked her, has he ever been abusive to you in the past? She replied, yes, he has. I mean, I never reported it. And then she mentions that she did call the police on him 2 years prior, and they came and took him off because he said he was going to kill himself. And you know what else? Did you guys notice the word choice and the way she said this again? She specifically stated in these words, I called the police on him and they took him off. That starts off sounding like she called the police on him and they arrested him. Rebecca knows better, though, because they will be able to look back at that event, right? So she made sure to include the fact that they were called because he said he was going to kill himself. However, she made sure to start it off by saying she called the police on him and they took him away. That sounded bad. But then she said it was a result of his threats to take his own life. That changes things. And it actually would change the way most of us would recount this story. I've called emergency services as a result of someone threatening to take their own life. When you dial 911, most of the time, the first questions they ask you are like, what is your emergency? Or do you need police, fire, or ambulance? I would automatically say ambulance if I was calling on someone who was attempting or threatening to take their own life, because that is the vehicle that people who are having some kind of emotional or mental breakdown are going to be needing, an ambulance. Maybe police are the first to show up because they're always waiting around for something to happen. And if someone is threatening to take their own life, they might be dangerous. So police are going to come out to that scene, most likely. And I guess, I don't know. I don't think they're required to go. I looked it up real quick as I was writing this. It turns out that police don't necessarily have to show up for every 911 call unless it's clear that there's a crime going on. That's good to know, but still, I've called 911 for medical emergencies several times in recent years, and police are usually the first to appear, but that might be because they're close by and they might be able to provide critical assistance, I would think, unless the police are just out there bored and stuff. So I'm going to do a little something different here. I didn't get to go to California like I had planned last week. Today is Sunday, April 26th. My alternator went out on my car. The battery light came on just as I was about 15 miles into the drive. So I called my oil shop and the technician was like, turn around. And just so you know, it's not a full mechanic shop. So don't come over there trying to talk about, can you fix my alternator? Because my guys that work there, they're pretty good with mechanics work. But they're oil change technicians. They're not supposed to be all up in there doing other stuff. Although they can and they will, but usually for their friends and family. But that would definitely be like oil shop after dark kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, the first thing we tried was getting a new battery because my battery looked a little corroded anyway. That didn't solve the problem, so they ordered an alternator. it arrived and they put it in and I started again on my happy way to California, but I was already like 3 or 4 hours behind by then. And then I've got to make that drive when I'm freshly awake in the morning, and I had my dogs with me and everything. So I got on the 15 freeway and I hadn't even made it past like downtown, like the Fremont Street area, when suddenly the freeway became a parking lot. And I sat there for a while and soon the freeway on the maps just started getting darker and darker red. And the red line was getting longer and longer. And I mean, this was like no other kind of red traffic line I'd ever seen before. And it showed that my commute had gone from 4.5 hours to over 7 hours. And it was past noon by then. And I already had to pee. And there wasn't going to be an exit off the freeway for miles, or it was going to feel like miles because I was stuck in traffic. I was stuck in parking lot traffic. So I had just made it through that interchange in downtown, and there's no exits until you go further away. And I just told my daughter, forget it. I'll come next weekend, which was this weekend that I'm recording this. I just got back. Eventually, cars started backing off an on-ramp that was actually on the left side of the freeway. That's not common in California at all. But there it was. Cars were lined up and going backwards. And I was like, okay, here I go. And I made it off the freeway backwards. I'm not the greatest backer-upper, and I got passed by some obnoxious Silverado. But I managed to make it off the freeway backwards, no less. Yes, I did. I did that. And made it without hitting anything. Then the battery light came back on. So I dropped the dogs back off at my place and I went back to the shop. It turns out that alternator that they sent over was faulty. The guys got a new one and it was a pain in the ass to take it out again, but they got it done. And I was finally finished with my repairs at like 7:30 that night. So yeah, California wasn't in the cards for me that weekend or last weekend at all. So my point is, as I was sitting there on the freeway, I started listening to crime. And I heard this story that I wanted to tell you about. And it was a case of self-defense, sort of. But the interview of the shooter, the person who admitted to the shooting, to me was 100% believable. I believed every word this guy said. I believed his mom and his mom's story about the person that he shot and killed. And even though what he did was still technically illegal, as it didn't quite amount to the legal definition of self-defense, it didn't matter to me. And it didn't matter to their neighbors and the surrounding community who knew this guy that he killed. And it didn't matter to the most important person who was to decide their fates. And I really want to share that case with you kind of sort of like right now, because I have a little bit of Rebecca fatigue. And I think it will make a good contrast to her story when we compare this guy's story and this guy and his mom. And I know this seems like a weird place to insert an entirely different case, but I think it will only serve to demonstrate what real trauma looks and sounds like versus Rebecca's supposed experience as we wind our way through the second half of my series, maybe a little bit more than half to come on, her killing her husband, Jason. So let me get through the background of the case and a few of the reasons why this man's story just hits so much differently than Rebecca's. I didn't even know this was another case of self-defense when I started listening to it, that the night before and the day that I started to leave for California. In this case, it was purely coincidental. I mean, seriously, I didn't know it was going to be another claim of self-defense, but it was. And I'm in the midst of this case that's kind of getting on my nerves a little bit. Well, actually, Rebecca's getting on my nerves. I'm glad to be putting the truth out there because nobody's really speaking of it. She had support in her community, just like the person I'm going to tell you about now had the support of his neighbors and his community as well. The only person who didn't support this gentleman that I'm going to start talking about right now is the prosecutor. And if this was the prosecutor that had been in charge of Rebecca's case, I think she'd still be sitting in jail to this day. And not only that, I think she'd be sitting in jail for like 30 years at least. Maybe even more since this whole thing with Jason and Rebecca took place in Florida. But anyway, I digress. Look at me digressing into the actual case that this is supposed to be about so I can go back and talking about the initial digression. Yeah, that totally sounds like that stupid host of Killafornia Dreaming. It's always like that, right? So the story that I discovered that day that I was trying to get to California, it began as far as the official investigation of it on December 3rd, 2017. So some 8.5 years ago as we sit here. A 911 call came into dispatch in Barron County, Wisconsin. Located in the northwestern part of the state, near that little part that sort of juts out into Minnesota, a little bit northeast of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area. This is where this happens. The caller was reporting that their dog had shown back up at their house carrying a human skull. They said that the human skull had a defect in it that clearly appeared to be a gunshot wound to the back of the head. The sheriff's office sent out their team of investigators and crime scene analysts, and before long, a shallow grave had been discovered. At the time of this discovery in 2017, all investigators had were the skeletal remains with a bullet hole in the skull. They had no idea what they were looking at, if this could be someone who took their own life or if this was something criminal. But because the bullet hole was located in the back of the skull, it having been self-inflicted was pretty summarily ruled out. It was believed that this was a murder. A search of missing persons reports in and around the surrounding areas and communities in recent years failed to yield anything that matched the remains that were found. Once all investigative avenues at the local level were depleted, the case was turned over to genetic genealogists to try and unlock the mystery of this person's identity. And you all know the process. A genetic family tree is developed, and eventually members of the family are eliminated one by one until they've narrowed it down to one person. And that one person was a gentleman by the name of Gary Albert Herbst. And I use the term gentleman loosely because nobody who knew this guy felt like there was a nice or polite or gentlemanly bone in his body to speak of. And when I say that, I mean that wholeheartedly. Nobody liked this guy. When word got around that he ended up with a bullet in his head, everyone was like, meh, bound to happen. Probably deserved it. Likely asked for it. It's about time, right? That was the general sentiment about this guy. So investigators, once they learned his identity, went to the home where Gary last resided, which is located in Scott County, Minnesota. And there were still some neighbors there who very vividly remembered the guy. They were able to recall back to 2013 when they did notice some strange activity going on at the Herbst residence. Now, to put this into context really quickly, the identification of Gary wasn't made until 2020, about 3 years after the skull was found, and some 7 years after Gary was last seen. And no, he wasn't reported missing, at least not voluntarily, and it seems like not in a way that if he was disposed of across state lines, they might not have been able to connect those dots to where the missing persons report was actually filed. But the neighbors said that there was a night that they recalled when it was pouring rain back in 2013. It was close to midnight. There was no moon, no stars, just rain and complete darkness. Being nosy neighbors as they should be, they saw something across the way at the Herbst home. These people were cleaning their floors vigorously, scrubbing floors and scrubbing walls. They were carrying black trash bags outside and a rolled up area rug. The neighbors didn't know what they were seeing, but it was definitely suspicious enough to stay locked into their memories. So the neighbor wife says to her husband, I wonder what they're up to. And the husband was like, you know what? It looks like they finally killed him. And with that, Gary Herbst was done away with the hopes that he'd never be seen again. But not just by the people who killed him, but the people who had to live next to the guy. Now, I said this guy was not considered to be gentlemanly in the least. And that is so much so that the legacy that this guy left behind, that even his obituary said, quote, Gary was described by his family and neighbors as being a volatile, angry, unpleasant person. That's his obituary, dreamers. That's how much of an impact this guy had on people. That's the nicest thing that they could say to him, about him, that he was volatile, angry, and unpleasant. Not that that means that this guy deserved what happened to him. I'm just saying. We've spent 2 episodes and almost 5 hours trying to figure out whatever the fuck it was that Jason Rogers did to deserve to be shot to death by his wife, right? But the worst thing Rebecca Rogers could come up with is that she embarrassed him at dinner and he was smoking cigarettes on the weekends. And the one time she did call the police on him, it was because he was expressing thoughts of self-harm, not harm to her. Like I said, I'm not saying that this guy that we're talking about, Gary Herbst, deserved a bullet to the back of the head per se. I'm just saying that when you go through life being an asshole to everybody, you might just piss off the wrong person and boom, you're dead. Well, as it turned out, Gary's remains were positively identified in February of 2020. Gary's sister Linda was contacted that same year in June to inform her that he had been found. Gary had not been in touch with his sister very much back at the time that he went missing, if at all. So it was kind of like, okay, he's gone, but he's kind of been gone. And that all goes back to Gary's assholery. He simply did not have good relationships with anybody, including his own family. We can call it relationally challenged. They say, don't ever speak ill of the dead, but I mean, what if there really isn't anything nice to say to begin with, and speaking ill is all you've got? I mean, is that a hall pass? If we're being honest, right? I would say that works for me. I've got my hall pass and I'm fixing to use it. There is so little about this guy that anybody liked that most of the pictures that exist of Gary Herbst are the ones of when he was younger. Gary's sister, Linda, she did think it was kind of weird that Gary's wife at the time did not file a missing persons report. His wife's name was Connie, and they had a son, Austin. Those are the 2 important people. Well, 3. One of them's dead. Austin is the son. Connie and Gary were the husband and wife and mother and father of Austin. All these people are going to come into play here as soon as I am able to progress with this side quest. So bear them in mind. Linda did sound a little perturbed by the fact that back in 2013 that they did not take any action to try and figure out what happened to Gary. I mean, but can you blame them? Even his own sister wasn't speaking to him, right? His wife and his son had to live with this asshole. So wife Connie had a story at the ready, but despite that and under mounting pressure from Gary's family, she eventually relented and did file a missing persons report in the county where they resided with the Elko Newmarket Police, which is where they lived. But in her report, Connie stated that Gary took his suitcase and left in an older gray Honda. She had no idea who was driving the car. 6 years later, with the identification of Gary's skull having been made, an investigation was finally launched into what actually happened to the guy. Nothing was done at the time that she filed that report, and guess that was kind of a lucky break for her. I guess maybe the lucky break was her being able to eliminate Gary from her life. I mean, if we believe what people say about Gary, if he was as big of an asshole that people have claimed that he was, imagine how he treated his wife and his son. So at the time, investigators were ready to question Connie and Austin. They happened to be working at the same place, so clearly these 2 stuck together closely in the aftermath of Gary's quote-unquote disappearance. They worked at a retirement facility. It goes without saying they were caught off guard when investigators showed up at their work. And when they were told that Gary had been found, the both of them just kind of sat there stone-faced. Didn't even say a word, not even a courtesy thanks. That was kind of a red flag, but the red flag that investigators wanted to ask about is why Connie hesitated to file that missing persons report back when he went missing. It's been said that she didn't file the report. It's also been said that she did, but she said that Gary left on his own. So I'm thinking that the report wasn't filed under missing persons necessarily, since the story was he took off voluntarily. And when missing persons records were searched, it was nowhere to be found. But Connie did file one since she was being pressured by Gary's sister and whatever other extended family that he had to do so. Also, this might have to do with the fact that they were in different states than where Gary was actually found. So in Wisconsin, when they searched missing persons, perhaps they didn't run across his report, which was filed back in Minnesota. So when investigators questioned Connie, she wasn't acting uncooperative. She appeared to want to be helpful. She said that she didn't think it was necessary to file a missing persons report since he was the one who left. She also said that it wasn't surprising to her that Gary left. His lifestyle involved drug use and domestic violence against her and her son. All the things that everyone else had said about Gary, Connie shared the same sentiments. He was just a jerk to everybody and nobody liked him. On top of that, he was driving them into financial ruin as a result of his drug addiction. When she was asked how his relationship was with Austin, Connie said that it was good until Austin got to be about the age of 10. That's when their son started intervening when his dad would start screaming at his mom. When asked if Gary ever hit her in the 30 years that they were married, she said once or twice. Once he punched her in the shoulder and left bruises. Another time he shoved her and she ended up breaking a toe. So the domestic violence across 30 years, taking everything into consideration, what she's willing to admit to, was very minimal. When Austin was questioned, he said that his dad was enraged when he left that day back in July of 2013. That when he did leave, he stole $5,000 from his mom and her wedding band. He claimed that there were a lot of loud noises and banging coming from his parents' bedroom. He said that he looked into the room and he asked his dad what he was doing, and he said that he was packing and leaving. Then some guy pulled up. His dad took off with him. Connie claimed that she had been at the library when she received a call from a very upset Austin telling her that his dad had just taken off with some guy. He took his suitcase with him and he was just gone. However, there were some inconsistencies in their stories. So much of the story that Austin and Connie told investigators at that point were lies, and their story would start to fall apart. One of the first inconsistencies was the fact that Connie was claiming to have been at the library when Gary walked out on them. But when she filed that missing persons report back in 2013, she indicated that she was at home when he left. The investigators became more suspicious when Connie brought up that Gary had stolen a .40 caliber gun when he left too, along with the money and the wedding ring. She told him that the gun was hers and that he took it with him when he left. But she did not mention that in her initial missing persons report. There was no mention of her gun being missing or stolen. While Connie managed to not really say anything that was overly damning against herself or her son, investigators did see several red flags that indicated to them that she knew more about Gary's murder than she was letting on, and that it was highly likely that she had some kind of involvement. Investigators went back to the drawing board. They needed a little more time to do a little more digging before they went back to Connie and Austin a few months later to speak to the both of them for a second time about Gary's apparent disappearance and his for sure murder. They really wanted to know more about the alleged domestic violence. Austin continued to try to stick to the same story about the abuse he and his mom suffered, but also continued to point to his father's own issues, drug addiction, and his own difficult and toxic personality that had potentially and probably led to his own murder. Austin kept pointing to an unknown person who his dad drove off with, a man with tattoos and a black shirt that really made Austin feel uncomfortable and uneasy. But the fact was that nothing either one of them was saying was being believed in these follow-up questions in these interviews. So they asked the two of them if they would take polygraph tests. They both agreed. Mom passed, but Austin did not. The FBI was involved at this point since the whole thing happened across state lines. And while most of us take polygraph results with a grain of salt, it is still used as an investigative tool to kind of help point detectives in a more clear direction. I've heard, like I think I've said this in the past, I've heard the polygraph is mainly used to eliminate suspects, not incriminate them or to say definitively that they did something when those tests are largely unreliable. So the FBI started putting some pressure on Austin. I guess they figured if Connie was able to cruise through the polygraph, that maybe Austin would be the first one to break. And they were telling him that they're pretty sure that he knows what happened to his dad. Austin tried to cling to that other guy in the car story that they threw out there. But then they started to accuse Austin of being involved in his dad's death. And either that involvement included his mom or some other person. However, Austin continued to deny it, insisting neither he nor his mom had any involvement. But every time Austin recounted the story of the man who drove away with his dad, the details shifted and changed. Austin was attempting to add more details in order to keep the investigators off his back. But those only amounted to inconsistencies that raised suspicions instead of assuaging them. In fact, nobody believed anybody came and picked up Gary. The whole story was made up, and it sounded exceedingly rehearsed and practiced. As you know, Austin and Connie probably knew this day would come and had a story kind of rehearsed. Years had passed, so maybe they weren't quite on top of it as they thought they would be. However, it didn't matter what the opinions of the police department or the FBI were. They needed more in the way of evidence to prove their theory that Austin and Connie were involved before they could move forward. So for the time being, they let the two of them be on their merry way again. They decided to revisit the neighbors who were living near the Herbst home back when Gary went missing. And you know, if nothing else, this dude Gary was a pretty memorable guy, just not in a good way. All the neighbors agreed the guy was a terribly mean and all-around horrible person. In fact, one of the investigators on the case was told over and over again that Gary Herbst was and still is the biggest asshole they'd ever met in their entire lives. Oh, and just to really round out Gary's charming personality, he was also unbelievably obnoxious and petty, like Olympic level petty. You upset him? Congratulations, you've just earned yourself a private concert of pipe organ music blasting out of massive speakers in his front windows. All day, all night, making sure every single neighbor got the full surround sound experience. Because nothing says healthy conflict resolution like aggressive church music at 2 a.m. And wintertime? Oh, winter was Gary's season. He would fire up his snowblower and generously redistribute his snow onto everyone else's yard because sharing is caring, right? But the second anyone else dared to come outside with their own snowblower, absolute meltdown. Suddenly they're, quote, trying to flood his house. Sir, what? I've never even lived in a snowy area, dreamers, but I feel like this kind of behavior is the kind that gets people real close to losing it. Bonus points. Gary, he'd do this nonsense in the middle of the night too, just to keep it extra unhinged. Neighbors interviewed on CBS's 48 Hours literally called the guy evil, which honestly feels less like an opinion and more like a public service announcement. At some point, you gotta start thinking, if there were ever a guy determined to test the limits of human patience, yeah, it's Gary Herbst. Oh, and it somehow gets worse. He'd yell at all the kids in the neighborhood because apparently that's the vibe. And then one couple actually caught him secretly recording their daughters. The dad had noticed a little red indicator light from a camera pointing straight from Gary's bedroom window into their kid's room. Totally normal, totally fine, right? So the dad goes outside, takes a closer look, and surprise, there's not just a camera, but Gary himself standing behind it, filming it with an actual camcorder. And the best part, Gary didn't even try to hide it. No panic, no apology, no, oh wow, this looks bad, doesn't it? Nothing. just standing there like it was completely normal behavior, almost mocking the fact that he'd been caught. Naturally, that led to an incident report with the local law enforcement because, yes, that's very much illegal and very much deeply disturbing. So, yes, Gary wasn't just annoying. He's out here running full-blown psychological warfare on his entire neighborhood like it's a hobby. Gary was also described as living on a permanent power trip, like it's a full-time job with paid overtime. He needed control. He craved control. And most importantly, he needed everyone within a 5-mile radius to be painfully aware of it. And how did he make it known? Oh, the usual stuff by harassing and aggravating literally anyone that he could in the neighborhood. Subtlety was definitely not Gary's thing. So, when we heard in the beginning, when I first mentioned Gary's disappearance and the neighbors were all casual, like, well, it looks like they finally killed him, they were referring to Connie and Austin, which really tells you everything you need to know, basically. Gary was so consistently awful that people genuinely believed it was just a matter of time before those two snapped and took care of the problem themselves. And honestly, the phrase good riddance was basically implied at the end of that sentence. Now, to be fair, because apparently we're doing that here, one neighbor said that they never really thought Gary was ever anything to be afraid of. According to them, he was all talk, all bluster, no bite, just noise. But that was just one neighbor. Everyone else, well, not everybody was that blasé about it. The general consensus was that Gary was dangerous, volatile, and unpredictable. The kind of guy that you keep an eye on at all times just in case the day he decides to escalate from annoying menace to serious problem, you're ready. So yeah, most people stayed on guard as long as Gary was around. And what about when he was gone? Well, Connie and Austin were apparently thriving. They were talking, visibly happy, excited, a whole personality shift. They were baking cookies, bringing them to neighbors, living their best freedom lives. And the neighbors, let's just say that there was a collective and very noticeable sigh of relief. Another person that was spoken to by CBS was the person who owned the house where Gary, Connie, and Austin were living at the time that he went missing, the new owner. She showed investigators where there had been a large red stain prior to them remodeling and adding in a closet. This was in the master bedroom. All this did was add to the circumstantial evidence that was building against Connie and Austin. The neighbors who described seeing the two of them cleaning floors and walls that I mentioned earlier, they also witnessed some strange activity in the backyard that same night. I said that it was storming, but it was a pretty bad thunder and lightning storm, so it was memorable, especially when there was activity going on outside late at night. It didn't seem normal to be doing anything really at that time in those types of conditions. Well, that evening, just after midnight, a pickup truck backed up into the backyard of the Herbst home. It pulled up flush with the sliding glass door, which was very unusual for them or anybody to do really because Gary was crazy obsessed with the condition of his front and backyard. So he would never ever allow anything or anyone to drive up onto his lawn like that. Seriously, it would never happen. The guy was almost OCD about things being neat and orderly in and around his home at all times. And it gets better. Not only did the neighbors see Connie and Austin scrubbing down floors and walls like they were prepping for a surprise visit from the forensic unit, they also watched them casually tossing large bags of trash full of mystery contents into the back of a truck. Oh, and let's not forget the rolled up area rug, because nothing says totally normal evening like a suspiciously human-shaped carpet burrito, right? And here's the real kicker. They later admitted that they never considered calling the police, and they being the neighbors. Not once. Why? Because Gary was apparently that awful. That's the level we're working with here. The neighbors literally suspected that Connie and Austin Herbst just offed the guy. Then they watched what looked very much like a full-on evidence disposal situation, and collectively went, you know what? I'm going to sit this one out. I mean, seriously, imagine witnessing what is basically a low budget crime documentary unfolding in real time right in front of your house and responding with, the community's better off anyway. Carry on. The neighbors didn't panic. They didn't report it. They practically cracked open a few cold ones, took a deep breath, and were like, ding dong, the asshole's dead. And then went right back to enjoying their newly upgraded, significantly more peaceful neighborhood vibes. And you know what? Honestly, it's almost impressive. Not that many people leave behind a legacy like Gary has, where the suspected murder of you becomes a neighborhood improvement project. The neighbors said it was honestly kind of heartwarming, like watching two people, meaning Connie and Austin, finally escape a dictatorship. As Austin and Connie emerged from Gary's questionable reign of household terror and just exist like normal human beings. Truly inspiring stuff, I tell you. And then, plot twist. Barely a couple weeks after Gary vanished into the void, Austin and Connie hosted a yard sale. But not just any yard sale. Oh no. This was basically everything Gary has ever touched must go clearance event. One gloriously nosy neighbor, a community hero, really, if you ask me, wandered over to investigate and reported back that the entire sale was suspiciously Gary-centric. Like, if it wasn't seriously nailed down and screamed, Gary owned this, it was on a folding table with a price sticker. Naturally, this neighbor asked Connie the obvious question, where's Gary? And Connie, without missing a beat, just goes, he didn't want to be married anymore, which is one way to phrase whatever that situation happened to be. Well, after Gary went quote unquote missing, his wife and son reacted with the kind of grief usually reserved for when your least favorite TV show finally gets canceled. Relief, closure, and maybe even a little celebration with homemade cookies, apparently. Suddenly they were out socializing, laughing, making friends, basically behaving like people who had just been released from a very inconvenient and annoying stay in prison. It was less, quote, tragic disappearance and more, quote, surprise personal rebrand for Connie and Austin. They were just doing so well, flourishing, really, positively glowing like two people who no longer had to hear Gary complain about whatever Gary complained about. And the neighborhood, they caught on fast. Once the word spread that Gary was gone, the mood shifted to what can only be described as silent, unspoken block parties. No invitations, no decorations, just the vibes. Suspiciously cheerful vibes. Because nobody actually knew what happened, that Gary had been murdered. But let's be honest, based on the neighborhood's reaction, that information would have probably been met with a thoughtful pause followed by, so we still doing drinks on Friday or what? The next thing investigators did was apply for and obtain a search warrant for the Herbst's residence. They were going to have to serve it on the new owner. I just mentioned her, but her name is Dee Hamlin. They were also bringing in a cadaver dog as well, and her name is or was Radar. And when Radar sniffed around, she showed strong interest in the garage, but also in that very spot that the owner had said that there was a red stain near where they had installed new closets. She being Radar, not the neighbor, alerted and sat down near the sliding glass door where the neighbors had said they seen Austin and Connie pull up a truck and load stuff into the back. When crime scene analysts applied luminol to the areas where Radar had alerted, those places glowed, indicative of the presence of blood. All still very circumstantial, but it does corroborate what the neighbors had reported seeing that stormy night all those years ago. After gathering all this totally not suspicious at all new information, investigators invited Connie and Austin back for a third round of questioning, because nothing says we believe you like a trilogy. This time, they brought up the minor detail of, all that blood inside the house. Just a casual, wall-to-wall amount of blood, no big deal, right? Well, Connie, unfazed, explained that Gary was a machinist and naturally was constantly nicking himself on the job. You know how it is. One minute you've got a tiny cut on your hand, the next minute your entire home looks like a deleted scene from a horror movie. Investigators, trying to stay grounded in reality, gently pointed out that this was not exactly, oops, I have a paper cut level of blood. This was more of like, something went very wrong level of blood. But Connie, she stayed completely committed, absolutely unshakable. She basically said, "This sounds wild, can't tell you a thing," and stuck to her story like it came with a lifetime warranty. And then, in this third round of questioning of Connie and Austin, the investigators moved on to everybody's favorite topic, what the neighbors saw, aka the unofficial, extremely thorough neighborhood surveillance program. They asked Connie about all the totally not at all suspicious activity, including that rolled up rug. You know, that classic home decor choice that just happens to look like it's hiding a body. Connie's response was immediate, confident, and very specific. Nope, absolutely not. There was definitely not a body in that rug. Which, of course, is exactly what people say when they're talking about perfectly normal rugs. She tried to stay calm and firm, but investigators could see it. There were subtle cracks. The shifting, the tension, this is getting uncomfortably real vibe. The pressure was very much on, and it was starting to show. But instead of backing off, Connie doubled down. In her mind, this was a game of just keep saying no until they get tired. Deny, deny, deny. What could possibly go wrong? To her credit, Connie did keep it together. No dramatic breakdown, no obvious panic. On the surface, she managed to hold steady, but underneath, she knew that the clock was ticking. The evidence was piling up, and her denials were basically running on borrowed time. Meanwhile, investigators were not going anywhere. If anything, they were just getting started. They began to suggest that Gary's behavior may have been psychologically abusive. Connie quietly acknowledged this, responding with a soft, "Yeah." Then they raised the possibility of physical abuse. Connie stated that Gary had hit her once, though she added that she believed she may have deserved it. Attention then turned to her son, Austin. They asked him a series of direct questions, whether Gary had been the kind of husband he should have been to his mother. Austin said no. They asked if he had felt the need to intervene at times. Austin said yes. Whether he believed he needed to protect his mom. Again, yes. The questioning built towards the events of that July day in 2013 when Gary was last seen alive, with investigators suggesting that this may have been a final act of protection. Austin was asked directly if he had fired the gun that resulted in his father's death. This time, he did not respond. As in the previous interviews, both Austin and Connie were allowed to leave. Investigators were not concerned about losing track of them. They believed that they could make an arrest when the time was right. The case was then presented to the prosecutor's office to seek a warrant. Although the evidence was largely circumstantial and no confession had been obtained, the prosecutors ultimately approved moving forward. On November 19, 2020, Connie, then 62, and Austin, 26, were both arrested. They were charged with second-degree murder. By the time the fourth interview rolled around, now with the added bonus of being post-arrest, Connie decided that she had had enough of the Q&A portion of the evening and firmly invoked her right to remain silent. Translation: I will not be participating in this episode. Austin, however, went in the complete opposite direction. He basically said, "You know what? Let's just wrap this up," and decided it was finally time to spill all the beans, like the entire pantry. What followed was a marathon 4-hour-long interrogation where investigators pressed Austin hard for every detail about the night his father was killed by him. And just like that, Austin took a hard left turn into full confession mode, essentially falling on the sword and taking complete responsibility for shooting his dad in the back of the head. It wasn't immediate. There was some buildup, some pacing, probably a few long silences, but eventually, sitting there in an interrogation room under arrest with nowhere left to pivot, he finally said the words, "Yeah, so I guess I should just tell you what I did." Austin later sat down for an interview with 48 Hours, that show where every scene looks like it was filmed in some kind of crazy, shadowy, suspicious place. And every word is delivered to us, the audience, like it's about to unlock the secrets of the world. There would be a dramatic pause, and what happened next changed everything. And honestly, watching that alongside Austin's interrogation, the guy was almost inconveniently believable. Like, sir, could you throw in one weird eye twitch or a random contradiction? Help us out a little bit. Show us how it's really done on these true crime shows, how these people try to squirm and wiggle their way out of responsibilities for killing somebody. But no, Austin was calm, direct, and painfully consistent, like someone who didn't get the memo that he's supposed to seem suspicious. Again, dreamers, I'm not some body language expert. I don't have a certification in spotting lies while eating snacks on my couch. But compared to some, let's say, less convincing individuals we've been talking about, I'm looking at you, Rebecca Rogers, Austin's explanation of self-defense actually lands in a way that feels pretty genuine. He doesn't dodge, he doesn't waffle, he just lays it all out there. Here's what I did, and here's why I did it. Which frankly is kind of rude because it makes the whole situation even harder for all of us to side-eye, right? And look, if Austin did fudge anything, it's pretty obvious that it would have been to protect his mom. And honestly, that's one of those moments where you're like, yeah, okay, not a big deal. Not legally great, but emotionally very on brand. Hard to hold it against a guy whose entire personality at that point is basically would commit crimes for mom, no further questions. Austin said his dad was basically a piece of shit, but he worded it much more eloquently than I ever could or would. He was pretty well spoken and earnest, and he was willing to sit there and be grilled on 48 Hours, and he came across just really genuine as anybody. Much more genuine than most people we watch on this TV show. Austin stated, quote, "My father, Gary Herbst, was vindictive to an extreme that I have never seen in anybody else. He was cruel, he was petty, he was violent." Austin said that he learned at a young age, by the age of 6 or 7 or so, that he needed to tread lightly around his dad. He feared him and his physical abuse. Gary would put cigarettes out on his skin. He was grabbed by his throat and thrown across the room or down the stairs as a punishment if he did something wrong. Austin did contradict his mom's account of the abuse. He claimed Connie was beaten on a regular basis by his father. He said he's punched her in the face, caused her to be black and blue, and even bloodied her at times. It was both physical and psychological abuse, according to Austin, and it all culminated in Austin finally feeling the fear worse than ever on July 8th, 2013. Austin was home that afternoon when his dad arrived home from work. He had been drinking. His mom came home also around 2 or 3 p.m. An argument over finances ensued. In his interview, Austin stated, quote, "There was yelling. I tried my best to protect her. I'm a wall and I will not let this continue." At the time, Austin was 19 years old. So according to Austin, his mom went to the library. His father was laying on the couch, dozing in and out of sleep. And he kind of looked over and saw something at the bottom skirt of the couch that was kind of lifted up. And when Austin took a closer look, he saw his dad had hidden his gun under there, which is something he said his dad had never done before. It was then it dawned on Austin that his dad was set up to shoot his mom as soon as she arrived back home. And he was having these thoughts that his dad was fixing to kill his mom. And it was just so instinctive what happened next. He just grabbed the gun and he aimed and fired. Austin described the moment as follows, quote, "I grabbed the gun, I pointed it at him, and I pulled the trigger." It was surreal almost, right? Like the bang went off, my hearing popped, and it was just immediate. There was almost like a numbness. Now here, Peter Van Sant, the 48 Hours correspondent interviewing Austin, said something quite profound in the next moment. And it just goes to show how unique and rare an interview like this one with Austin actually is. But Peter next said, quote, "I've never asked this question in all of my years on 48 hours. What was it like to pick up that pistol, point it at your father's head, and pull the trigger?" The reason why Peter had never asked this question is because nobody ever is this seemingly candid, forthcoming, or honest about the moment that they did what they did. Nearly everyone we hear from, when the criminal defendant is made to explain or own up to what they did, if they even admit to it, will say that they have no memory, or they have no idea what happened, or can't explain the moment in a truthful, meaningful way. Starting here with the woman we're talking about in these episodes, Rebecca Rogers, keeping it as vague as possible, right? When the repeated claims that she never shot that gun before, she guesses that she hit him, she just doesn't know, she just fired the gun, and she had absolutely no reaction to it at all in the manner that Austin has described that he did here. He described actual, real feelings and sensations he was experiencing when he fired that gun. And it almost brings you right to the moment when Peter asked him that question that he never asked before. How did it feel to shoot his dad? And to me, Peter got a real answer. Imagine if he had asked that of Rebecca, or Leticia Stout, or Teresa Stone, or Ali Abulaban, or Yvonne Serrano, or Jade Jenks. All these cases I've recently covered both on this show and on the Patreon episodes. All of those that I just mentioned lived in this clouded state of ambiguity and vagueness. But Austin here, he had answers, and they were answers that we could accept. So to that question, Austin answered, quote, "It broke me. It changed who I am irrevocably. I can never be the person I was or even the person I would have become had that never happened." Peter Van Sant asked if he was anguished or horrified, and Austin replied, quote, "There was a level of relief knowing that I would never have to have that fear again. Having to worry about my mother's life, having to worry about my life." And dreamers, when you watch Austin in this interview, if you do watch this 48 hours episode or you choose to, he just feels very real. He could be lying through his teeth, but it is an extraordinary thing to hear this man talk about killing his dad and how raw the feelings were in the aftermath. We just so rarely get these type of answers about how they were feeling directly from the killer, and for it to have actually happened and be a very real moment that real emotions were experienced. And yeah, what he did was very, very illegal. Do not recommend. And it did amount to murder. And there's no getting around that. I'm not saying the guy was right. I'm just saying that he's refreshingly real, and I believe him. When describing getting rid of his dad's body, Austin said he rolled him up into a rug and put him in the back of their truck. They crossed over into Wisconsin. They found a patch of trees, and they left Gary there. And Austin then said, quote, "I figured that wildlife would take care of the rest. Bears, foxes, they would devour the body, and the bones would be scattered, and nobody would know." Peter Van Sant replied, "That sounds barbaric." And Austin said, "Absolutely. But I was not in the state of mind that I ever want to revisit. I was at the lowest I'd ever been, both in my emotions and in my humanity." So dreamers, the windup is that the prosecutors did not care what happened or what Austin and Connie did or didn't do. They didn't care if Gary was the biggest asshole in the world, which is pretty much the full consensus of everyone who knew him. Austin and Connie still did what they did, and they were going to be both charged with second-degree murder. In the end, Austin attempted to take full responsibility for the killing, but his mom was still involved after the fact. There are those who believe Connie was more involved in Gary's killing, more so than she is willing to say, and more so than Austin is willing to say. She even said that she was home when she first told the story that he had walked out on them. But by the time that they were being charged, both mother and son claimed that she was at the library and not present when Gary was shot. I tend to believe that Connie had more to do with it than either one of them is willing to admit to. But if he's going to fall on the sword and stick to that story, then so be it. Neither one of these people really had anything to gain but their freedom and happiness, and they stuck to each other until it came time to face the music. And that is also a thing we don't see very often, that unconditional loyalty to one another when it comes to co-defendants. Remember that mom of four, Melody Ferris? She comes to mind. Remember her? She's the one who murdered her husband, and he ended up shot to death and burned up in the fire pit on their property. They had a farm. And Melody ended up being convicted despite her defense team trying to pin the murder on her own son. She had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and one son still lived on the property. She was trying to place the responsibility of her husband's death on him. As it turns out, his cell phone being out of the area of the murder while his mother's cell phone was in the area of the murder seemed to be the thing that this case hinged on. But in addition to that, Melody Ferris was having an illicit affair, and there was money to be gained. She had all the motive, but the cell phone evidence was really what did her in. And the son, he also seemed believable. Melody Ferris came off as narcissistic, arrogant, and indignant. Her vibe kind of reminds me of that Adelson matriarch. What's her name? Donna Adelson, is that her name? Yeah, her. They're cut from the same cloth, these two, Melody Ferris and Adelson. Anyway, Austin ended up pleading guilty to aiding and abetting second-degree intentional murder in March of 2021. Connie pleaded guilty to aiding an offender and an accomplice after the fact. Austin received a 12-year sentence. He'll be released in 2029. Connie received 2 years but was released after 3 months. In the end, at sentencing, the judge did what he needed to do, and he followed the law, but delivered a sentence for both that was significantly lower than what the prosecutors felt that they both should get, which was 30 years. The judge made it known that he believed everything everyone had to say about Gary. And he believed Austin when he said he believed that Gary would kill his mom. And he believed that Austin felt an obligation to protect his mother. They also had the unwavering support of the community in which they lived at the time that Gary was killed. And to me, with that sentiment of the judge on the case and the feelings of Austin's and Connie's friends and neighbors, it just speaks to how much of an impression Gary left on everyone. The only one who felt the sentence was unfair was Gary's sister, who herself had been estranged from him for many years anyway. They weren't close. And while the dynamics of that aren't anybody's business but theirs, I wouldn't be surprised if it was because Gary was an insufferable, miserable asshole. The last thing Austin said in the 48 Hours episode was when he was asked this question: when you get out, what do you want people to know about whether you will be a potential danger to society or a contributor to society? And Austin replied, my only goal in life is to leave something behind that's worth remembering. This isn't it. This isn't it at all. I want to leave behind a legacy other than I killed my father. So getting back to Rebecca, we left off where she said that she had called and reported Jason to the police and that they hauled him off because he was threatening to harm himself. Not her, himself, right? The detectives next asked, has he ever pulled a gun on you or anything like that? She replied, he's never pulled a gun on me, but he's always looking for the gun. Usually I will hide it or something. And here she's really trying to sound emotional once again. I'm so tired of trying to fake her cries and her whining and her whimpering because it's really cringy and fake. They then asked Rebecca if she hid the gun prior to this situation happening on this particular day when she shot him, suspecting that Jason went in to retrieve a gun from where he thought it would be, but because maybe she hid it, there was no chance that he was going to be able to come at her with it. I think her answer is very weird and suspicious anyway. This whole thing about he never pulled a gun on me, but he's always looking for the gun? Like, what the fuck does that even mean? And the fact that the detective even asked if she hid the gun prior to this situation on that day that she shot him, it just goes to show that they're also thinking that this was a setup. But I really don't think Jason was going into the closet to get the gun. But then she did say that she always hid the gun whenever they fought. I don't know how she would be able to anticipate that happening, so I don't believe that for a minute because it doesn't make any sense. When you compare that to what Austin said regarding the gun and the shooting of his dad, he was very specific about where he saw the gun and how much that instilled fear in him. And that was the first time he'd ever seen it hidden under the couch. He said something to the effect that his dad was drunk and sort of dozing off on the couch, and he saw the skirt of the couch was sort of lifted or disturbed. He could see that part of the gun was sticking out, and that was the first time his dad had ever had the gun next to him in the living room. And that meant to him that when his mom walked back in that house, his dad was prepared for a confrontation, and he was prepared for that confrontation to turn deadly. Those details that Austin provided, and the fact that none of this had ever happened before, I mean, there's just a level of believability to it, I think the most important thing Rebecca said was Jason never pulled a gun on her before. But I think in the moment she realized, wait, that doesn't play well into my story of needing to use deadly force against him. So I better say something like, he always goes and looks for the gun. Yeah, no, it's not working for you, lady. Not at all. The investigators asked Rebecca if the gun, if she didn't hide it, then it should be in the closet, right? She said that it should be, as far as she knows. He had a 9mm up in the closet. It's a 9mm. And he has a shotgun, but I wouldn't imagine he would have pulled that out. That was a gift from his father, because that matters, right? If someone wants to shoot you, they're going to shoot you with what they have handy. Maybe the shotgun is more unlikely than the handgun. I don't know, but it doesn't matter because it's nonsense and lies. They next asked Rebecca, after he's laying on the floor and he's moaning, what do you do next? Rebecca replied, I called 911 immediately. My kids were crying. Oh, dreamers, this woman, she's insufferable. She just can't resist circling back to the kids to really sell that victim narrative, can she? Gotta turn on the emotional volume all the way up, but somehow it's not quite landing the way she thinks it is, because while she's sitting there boo-hooing about her kids, let's not forget, these are the same kids who were in the house when she made the decision to kill Jason Rogers. Those toddlers didn't just magically become traumatized out of thin air. She is the reason why they're crying in the first place. She didn't have to put them through all that. At all. There were options, plenty of them. She did not have to shoot Jason. He was not a threat. He was walking away. His back was turned. She shot him in the back. At any point, she could have grabbed her kids and removed herself from the situation. The non-murder option. But instead, she chose to kill their father right there in their presence. That was her decision and no one else's. And now she wants the cops to feel sorry for her because the kids were traumatized? Really? After she's the one who created that trauma. It's the same play again and again and again. Use the kids as a shield to distract from what actually happened. The first-degree murder of their father. The detective asked, where were the kids when the shooting happened? They were in their bedrooms. JC's in the room right by my bedroom. Riley's in the closest one to the door. Riley never got out of her room. JC came out twice, and she looked at him laying there. And I didn't want to walk back over him. Seriously, I have no words for her choosing to do this with her children in the house. If you believe this woman's story that this was self-defense and her life was in imminent danger, then of course she had no choice. But if you're like me and believe that Rebecca planned this whole thing, then she absolutely had a choice. She could have chosen to shoot him when she had the chance without the children there. I know it's hard enough to even go to the bathroom without your kids on your heels, or better yet, How about not choosing to murder? That would have probably been the better option. The detective next asked her, "What did 911 tell you to do?" "They told me to put the gun down, and I told them I shot my husband. I mean, I don't, I, it was, what did they tell you?" "They said, 'Where's the gun?' And I said, 'I put it on my dresser,' or he said, 'Set the gun down,' or something. I can't remember exactly the words. And I said, 'It's down, it's on the dresser.' But then I noticed it was on my lower dresser. So I went and grabbed it and put it on the higher dresser. And then he said the cops are on their way, and I just stayed on the phone with him, and I saw my husband and he was alive, but I was afraid. I didn't want to go up to him as I was too scared to." Oh my God. Yeah, she's so scared. Yet in the middle of all of this, she is the one person who created this entire situation in the first place. Yet she's so scared. She's too scared to step over her dying husband's body. Blah, 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 boo hoo. Okay, so when Rebecca said that she was scared, the detective, really sounding like he's about to fall asleep, he's so done with this nonsense, he asked, "Did you go out the window?" Rebecca refused to take responsibility for making that decision, while at the same time continued to attempt to make it seem as though Jason was still continuing to be a threat to her life, even though he had a bullet in his skull and 2 in the back. Still afraid, apparently. So much so that she refused to walk over him. She probably didn't want to get any of his blood on her pretty little shoes or on her outfit or anything that might be oozing out of that bullet wound in his head. She said that she was told by 911 to go out the window. The detective followed up with, "So you raised up the window?" Also, again, Rebecca refusing to take responsibility for anything, literally, including the fact that she had an easy way out through a window, as she replied with this non-answer. "The screen's been out of that window. I did not take that screen out, as if this matters. We had no AC a while back, and he took that screen out and put the window unit in, and he's never put the screen back. So it's all Jason's fault that the window was the only convenient way for her to not step over his own body, right?" So Rebecca went into her next answer regarding what the conversation on 911 was about. She stated, quote, "He said, 'Are you going to be where you can open the door for the cops?' Because I told him that I didn't want to walk over him, boo-hoo, 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 because his arms were all moving and stuff, and I was afraid." Oh, Lord, dreamers, her crying is so fake and so well-timed. Anytime there's a stressful moment in all the death and carnage that she caused with her actions that she needs to talk about or be held accountable for, she starts with this whiny talk that's meant to sound like crying. But like with Austin, he didn't even try to fake a tear. Not one. He was just like, "I killed him and I felt this sense of relief." Maybe it's different for men and women, the emotional reaction, the inability or ability to cry when we think that they should or would in a real, true, valid situation. I mean, in one of the 2 episodes that we've done this far, I got emotional talking about a time my daughter's dad put his hands on me. I fought really hard to not let that get to me. And there are times when I'm so upset about things that I bypass crying and just go into really super heightened emotions. I raise my voice, I become really animated, but I'm not necessarily crying. But Rebecca, she's mimicking what she sees on TV and in the movies. Clearly, it's pretty obvious. Her dramatic pauses when she thinks that she would be directed to action, cue the waterworks. No Oscars in this lady's future, dreamers. Make no mistake about that. Now, at this point, the detectives are going to start challenging Rebecca's story, but later on, she will challenge them back. And they started off by doing so by asking a very pointed question finally. Quote, "Is it possible that you shot more than twice?" Up to this point, Rebecca has only admitted to shooting into the wall once and shooting on Jason. She won't even say, "I shot him, I fired at him, I pointed the gun at him and pulled the trigger." No, all she said was, "I shot on him." She did not want to talk further about the 2 more times that she overkill shot Jason. stating, quote, "I know I shot once before I even went back in there." Yeah, but when you went into the bedroom, is it possible that you could have fired more than 2 shots? I don't know. It's possible. There it is right there. Rebecca does not want to take responsibility for the other shots that she fired into Jason. But she said that she saw the blood on his head, right? That means she already talked about the 3rd gunshot wound that Jason suffered, because she put 2 in the back, 1 in his head. That makes 4 total because she said she fired 1 prior to that. I think there was either 4 to 5 shots fired and another hole in another wall somewhere. Maybe she missed Jason once. I don't quite know for sure how many times she fired total. I do know for sure she fired at least 4. Then Rebecca did something that we don't see very often. She asked the first of a handful of questions of the detectives. I think it was a 2-faceted ploy on her part. One is to feign ignorance about what she did, and the other would be to try and elicit whatever information the investigators had that she wants to be let in on. And not only that, a little later on, Rebecca is going to take what they say to her and try to use it against them. She's trying to play verbal chess here with these officers, but they immediately shut that down and just make her look stupid. We'll get to that. I get very excited every time Rebecca reminds me of her dumbassery. So I've been getting ahead of myself in some of the series, more so than usual, and I try not to because I don't want to spoil anything. So here, when the detectives asked if it was possible that she fired more than 2 shots, Rebecca replied with a question of her own and said, "Is it possible? Did you see more than 2 shots?" Oh, and she had also asked about whether or not she dialed from the house phone, because there, like I said, she's just trying to pretend like her memory is just mush right now. "Did you see more than 2 shots?" she asked. The detective replied, "No, I'm just trying to get the bearings on everything first." And then he pulls out a piece of paper and he wants to kind of diagram what she's saying. So he draws the hallway and says, "That's the bathroom and that's the window and this is the closet." And he asked her, that would go into the closet, and she has to clarify the proximity of the closet to the bedroom door and the fact that the closet doesn't have doors on it, but this one has a door here, but mine doesn't. I mean, he is not even giving 2 shits. He just talked over and said, "And you come down the hallway." So he's drawing her path to Jason's destruction here for her. So this has got to be really awkward because now she's going to have to visually make a map to the way she carried out this murder. Literally draw a map for him. "You turn into the bedroom and he's in the closet right here, correct?" Rebecca couldn't bring herself to agree with the scene that these detectives saw for themselves with their own eyes earlier that day, right? And replied, "Well, he was more out by the door, but he was in the closet and then he came towards me." Okay, that's a different story. She just said earlier that he was digging in the closet and she just shot. Now she's claiming that he was coming towards her, telling these officers that he was in the closet and then he came towards me. If that's now what she's saying. Now, Rebecca answers the next question kind of truthfully. The detective said, "He came towards you, but when you see him in the closet, is that when you fire a round?" She replied, short but sweet, very quickly, "I shot him." I don't know why she suddenly made that admission, but I have a theory about it, and I think it was a mistake. I think that this woman is so hell-bent on disagreeing with everything that these detectives are saying that she kind of has this deceit autopilot on and kind of slipped up. He just said, "Is that when you fired a round?" Instead of agreeing with the fact that she fired a round, she couldn't even give the detective even an inch that she's going to agree with what they're saying and provide a truthful answer that's in the affirmative. Just like, "Are you blonde?" "Well, it's dyed." "Are your eyes blue?" "Well, they're gray-green. They change colors." "Is that when you fired a round?" "I shot him." In Rebecca's efforts to make sure that she disagrees with these detectives and what they have to say, she inadvertently worded this answer in the most incriminating way possible. So when the detective asked, "Okay, so does he come at you in this direction? You've already made your way into the bedroom when he comes at you. Were you in the bedroom?" I mean, it's kind of weird that she just said she shot him, and the next question was, "And then does he come at you?" Like, what are the chances, right? The guy was shot 3 times. I don't know what order the shots are in, But we will find out later on that the final shot is the one in the head. She's going to admit to that in spectacular fashion, probably accidentally, yet again. So, since the final shot was in the head, the other two went somewhere in his back. He was not coming towards her before he was shot. His back was turned to her. She said he was on the ground, and she's going to say it again and then some. Yet somehow, he's still coming after her, even though she shot him again, and he's ended up on the ground, but he's somehow coming at her. He has to continue to be a threat in this scenario of hers in order for him being shot in the back to be justified. She's still going to insist that he's a threat even after she shoots him in the head because, again, she needs to have the justification for this overkill. She knows that she did not need to shoot the guy 3 times. Even George Zimmerman had the decency to only shoot Trayvon Martin once. If this woman would have shot him once, gathered her kids and ran out of the house and called 911, I do not think we'd be sitting here talking about her today. She wanted him dead. That much is clear. The detectives continued their questioning by next asking, "You already made your way into the bedroom then, right? When he comes at you, were you in the bedroom?" Rebecca replied, "I think I was still in the door. I don't think I came into the bedroom." "Okay, well, where was he laying when you shot him? After you shot him and he fell the second time, did he fall right here?" "He fell, the dresser's right here, and he was laying all the way across the doorway. His head was on this side and his feet were that way." "So, if you didn't want to step back over him, I guess what I'm saying, you'd be further into the room?" Rebecca disagreed with this too, and she says, "No, I had to step over him initially when I called 911. "Where was the phone at when you called 911? "I don't know. I have 2 phones, they're cordless, and they're never on the jack. I don't know." Rebecca again asked the question to try to dig on some information, while at the same time attempting to pad her claims of memory loss when the detective asked where are the phone jacks in that room, and she said there's not one. And they said, "So you're saying when you..." But she interrupted them and said, "I guess I called him from the home, did I?" One of the detectives quickly replied, "I don't know." And she replied, "I'm thinking I did." You see, what she's doing here is pretty transparent. She's trying to gauge how much the investigators actually know. At the same time, she's playing up this idea that she was just so overwhelmed in the moment, so terrified, so emotionally flooded, that somehow it scrambled her memory. Conveniently, of course, only when it comes to the actual moment that she shot Jason. Because oddly enough, when she's talking about literally anything else, her recall is crystal clear, sharp, detailed, locked in. I mean, chicken biscuit, anyone? Remember that from back in the first episode? She remembered that when her daughter's BFF showed up at their house, she had a chicken biscuit in her hand. Suddenly, she's got photographic memory for everything except the one moment that actually mattered. What a coincidence. And what makes that stand out even more, this isn't someone who's confused or disoriented. This is someone who is very much in control of what she chooses to remember and what she claims she can't. Now compare that to Austin Herbst and how he described the moment he shot his father. He couldn't hide behind all the "I don't remembers." He talked about the actual experience, the emotions, the sensations, the surrealness, the numbness, even a sense of relief. Those are all complicated, uncomfortable, but very real responses. They sound honest because they acknowledge the weight of what happened instead of dodging it. And the truth is, those kinds of feelings aren't unusual in traumatic situations. I felt similar things myself when both of my parents passed away. I had completely different relationships with each of them individually, completely different circumstances, and years apart they passed away. But some of the same underlying sensations still showed up. With my dad, there was a sense of relief that he went quickly and without prolonged suffering. With my mom, there was relief in knowing that her long, painful decline was finally over, and maybe, just maybe, the weight of that experience could start to ease. Relief doesn't mean you don't care, it just means you're human. Which is exactly why her version stands out so much. Because instead of acknowledging anything real or complex, she leans into selective memory loss at the most critical moments. and expects that to carry the narrative. I realize this isn't exactly an apples to apples comparison, the next thing I'm about to say, but I literally just got back to California about an hour after I sat down and started writing this part of this episode. It was the last Sunday of April. Today's Monday, so it's the next morning. I was writing all of this on Sunday afternoon when I got home from California. I started recording. I got about an hour in yesterday, and I picked back up this morning, and I'm going to get this out to you before I do anything else today. This is the first thing I'm doing. I'm still in my pajamas. I'm recording this because I cannot wait any longer. I've got to talk my shit. But like I said, I was supposed to go to California last week. I brought that up earlier, right? And my car decided to have a moment right as I started the drive. I needed to replace that alternator. So naturally, I took it back to my oil shop and the guys took care of it. But by the time I attempted to get back on the freeway, my ETA had extended itself by another 3 hours. And at that point, this trip became a firm, this is not happening. I had every intention of getting these last 2 episodes out before leaving this past weekend. But between the car situation and everything else going on, that plan fell apart. And by everything else going on, I mean the issues, I think I brought it up in the Facebook group about the custody battle, or, you know, how somebody who shall remain nameless called me a child sex abuser on Yelp and tried to disparage my business in that way. But I quickly shut that down. But I have been having a lot of problems with that lately. And I let it affect me really badly in February, but I finally pulled my head out of my ass and just started to just ignore it, which helps. It doesn't help the entire situation, but it helps me in my mental health. So you got to do what you got to do. But anyway, so fast forward to yesterday. I handled a few things in California at our house over there. I had the handy person come by. I got some tasks done. And after that, my daughter Evelyn and I, we ran some errands. We returned something to Home Depot. We grabbed some boba. I stopped at PetSmart for the dogs. Everything was going smoothly, productive, efficient, almost impressive even, until I got to PetSmart and I went to actually purchase something and I realized I didn't have my wallet. Now, I didn't need it at Home Depot because it was a return, and I didn't need it at Boba because we ordered online. So this trip to PetSmart was the first time when I actually thought I needed to use my wallet, and it was gone. Not in my purse. It wasn't anywhere. Despite the fact that I was certain that I had it because I had taken the receipt to Home Depot out of it, or at least I thought I did, when I was making that return. So I started my own investigation. I called Home Depot, no wallet. Called the boba place, no wallet. Searched my car, nothing. Searched Evelyn's car, nothing. Went back to Home Depot, still nothing. At this point, I started locking my cards like it was a full-blown financial emergency. And to make it better, even more like dramatic, I had cash in my wallet. It was money I was supposed to deposit from the oil shop, but I kept putting it off. So now I'm convinced that I've not only lost my wallet for the first time ever in my life, but I've also donated a chunk of money to the general public, apparently. Eventually, Evelyn and I gave up the search. I went home, I hugged Fred, and yes, I was genuinely upset. I never lost my wallet. I usually don't carry cash like that, so this felt especially insidious. I had that numb, disoriented feeling like, is this actually happening? When emotions spike like that, you feel it physically in your body. Now, obviously, this is not the same life or death situation, but it is an emotional response in the moment, and it was very real. The weekend had gone so well, and I was genuinely disappointed to have it end like that. So I started canceling cards and ordering replacements. I even paid $37 for a new driver's license. Because why not fully commit to the crisis, right? And then, of course, my daughter magically finds the wallet sitting on a small table near the dog's leashes because I had set it down while grabbing a harness and I just left it there. The sense of relief was immediate and intense. Honestly, I could have cried again because I did cry over my wallet. Once I had exhausted all the avenues and searched everywhere I could, I cried. So the relief set in. It was big, it felt intense, but it was very quickly followed by annoyance because I had spent money replacing things that I didn't actually lose. And all of that is to say, is when something caused you intense stress or fear, and then it suddenly, in a moment, like a blink of an eye, it's resolved, that sense of relief is fast and it's immediate and it's palpable. It's real. It doesn't linger in some long, drawn out, performative way like Rebecca's tried to frame it. And that brings me back to her story. If she was truly in fear for her life and then was able to neutralize the threat, that relief should have been one of the first emotional responses. And immediately after that, the next instinct would have been concern for her children. I lost my wallet. I was upset. I cried. I didn't hug my kid, but I hugged my dog. I needed that. I needed to make sure that I was okay and they were okay, and I just wanted their comfort. Her next concern, her instincts should have brought her to her children as soon as she neutralized the threat, removing them from the situation, protecting them from witnessing what had just happened to their father, what she just did to their father. Instead, we're supposed to believe that she remained in a prolonged state of extreme fear, even while sitting in an interrogation room, as she continued to fake cry about how afraid she was still of Jason, after she had already pumped him full of lead. So yes, I understand that sense of relief fairly well, even in situations of death, but also in situations of wallet loss, which is exactly why Rebecca's version of events feels a little bit overstretched when it comes to all of this fear that just wasn't coming to an end. Just fear after fear after fear, and it's not stopping. Shoot him once, I'm still afraid. Shoot him twice, I'm still afraid. Shoot him in the head, and I'm still afraid. I can't even walk over him, I'm so afraid. I'd rather go out the window than go get my kids. That's how afraid I am. It's like, no, once he's down, you're relieved. You feel safe, and then the instincts to get your kids and get out of the house and run for help. That none of that kicked in for her. It was just she was sitting in her fear, and that just doesn't happen. Because the situation is fluid and it's very dynamic and it's changing second to second. So that fear to continue to linger is just utter bullshit. Anyway, after that, Rebecca tried fishing for information and faking ignorance about the things that she did before and after shooting Jason by saying she thinks she called from the house phone. So she was asked, so are you telling me that when he was shot the second time, you stepped over him and went into the room? Rebecca replied, yes, because I wanted to watch him. I wanted to make sure he wasn't going to get up and come and get me. Oh, yes, the performance when she says this. Truly award-winning, so emotional, so heartfelt, so unbelievably fake. Because, for the rest of us, parents, preschool teachers, nannies, random humans with a pulse, when something even slightly scary happens, our brains don't go, quick, save yourself and forget everybody else. It's more like an automatic blink and you miss it reflex. Where are my kids? Are they safe? Same goes for the pets. It's just basic human wiring. But sure, let's pretend that doesn't apply here to Rebecca. Yes, obviously, you have to protect yourself first. You can't help anyone if you're down, but that's a split-second calculation, a reflex, not a full-blown lifestyle choice. Meanwhile, Rebecca has now fired a gun 5 times inside a home where she's raised 4 daughters, and somehow still not a single thought spared for her children. Not one. Priorities? Oh, she had those, just not the kind that most people would recognize. Her priority was herself. Rebecca is still only worried about herself after she's now fired that gun a total of at least 4, potentially 5 times inside the home where she raised 4 daughters. Not a care in the world. Leading up to the shooting, Rebecca mainly worried about getting the witnesses out of the house so she could work with the unreliable ones, meaning her 2 toddler-aged children. But she guns down their father and is blubbering about him coming to get her. Jason was still alive, but he was mortally wounded. I'm sure thoughts of his girls crossed his mind as he lay there with his life slipping away. But not Rebecca. I just wanted to make sure you wasn't going to come and get me. My kids, their safety, their well-being, their mental and emotional health be damned. Yeah, those things didn't quite make Rebecca's priority list. So next, the detectives asked, okay, when he was laying on the ground and trying to get up, did you have to shoot him again? Did you think he was coming at you and you had to shoot him again? Rebecca continued to deny some of what she did, but also sort of admitting to what she did do by saying this stupid yet easily disprovable bullshit. Quote, no, I shot twice, I think. When I saw blood on his head, I didn't shoot him again. Oh yes, that moment where the detectives just sit there in silence for an uncomfortably long few seconds. Totally normal pause, not the kind of silence where you could practically hear their brains short-circuiting, trying to process the nonsense that they just heard. Because in one single statement, again, another truly impressive feat by Rebecca, this woman manages to kind of admit to shooting Jason without actually admitting to all the times that she shot him. Incredible multitasking on her part, by the way. She's also sort of acknowledging that he was shot in the head, but instead of saying, I shot him in the head, she goes with the much more mysterious and spontaneous version. I saw blood on his head. Oh, wow, really? Just appeared there, did it? Fascinating. But wait, there's more. Rebecca also makes sure to clarify that she didn't shoot him again after seeing blood on his head. So technically, telling a version of the truth while still conveniently leaving out the part where she already fired into him more times than she has admitted to. Because why be accurate when you can be creatively selective? And the grand total that she admits to shooting him? Twice. That's it, twice. I'm sorry, but it was 3 times, ma'am. 3 times, not twice. And I'm going to go ahead, dreamers, and call this episode right here. I'm about to reach 2 hours and I really want to get to recording this, or actually, I wanted to get to recording this last night. I was hoping to finish it, but I didn't quite get to. So look, dreamers, yes, I still have an hour left of this interrogation, if you can believe that. In 3 episodes, 6 hours of content, I've only talked about 30 minutes of her interview. I don't know how I managed to do that. Hopefully it bores people to sleep, which is the intentions of this podcast to begin with. So we've still got an hour and 6 minutes to go. Just a quick, easy breezy, lemon squeezy little listen. It only feels like I've been here since the beginning of the new millennium because we spent so much time wandering through completely unrelated stuff. But hey, you know how that goes. At this rate, I might as well turn this into a 5-part series because obviously that's what we all need. I'll try to keep it to 4, assuming part 4 doesn't turn into a feature-length film and runs over 2 hours or too much over 2 hours. I don't think it will, but that all depends on me. At this point, who even knows anymore? My goal is to get this recorded for you by the end of the day. Oh yeah, that didn't happen. I wrote that yesterday because apparently I thrive on chaos. I finished this up on Monday. What time is it? It's 11:07 a.m. So next I got to start cooking food and working on spreadsheets. So I'm going to wrap this part 3 up right here because things are about to get good. The detectives, I mean, it's been good for me anyway. I don't know about you. You might be hating me right now. The detectives are going to start discussing what they actually saw at the scene of Jason's murder. I mean, shooting. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Like, things like blood showing up in places that Rebecca's little fairy tale conveniently forgot to account for. I mean, minor details, which means they're about to start turning up the heat. And wouldn't you know it, Rebecca's going to start getting exasperated. When they ask her a question, they're going to say something like, so this is not what they really asked her. So how'd it feel to shoot your husband? And she's going to do stuff like, the dramatic sighs, the annoyed body language, the long, drawn out exhaling, like she's the one being inconvenienced here. I love her for that. Honestly, it's kind of refreshing to watch Rebecca finally answer the ultimate question. Can your world-class bullshittery survive a grilling from 2 seasoned detectives? Can't wait to find out. Join me very soon again for the next installment of Reading Between Rebecca Rogers' Bullshit as I basically cross examine her interrogation. I want to thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate all of you so much, as always. Until next time, take care, be safe, and oh, look, I'm getting to 2 hours right now. A few more seconds. There we go. Sweet dreams.